Hi, beautiful people. Hey, welcome back. So we are here for another wonderful edition, Give It to the People Live. But this is our She podcast series. I'm just turning the music down. I don't feel like even fading in and fading out today. We're just going to jump into it because I have another great guest. And for you that are out there, if you don't know who I am, I'm Chisa Penix Brown. I'm the chief curator of Give It to the People, which we are a mental wealth company that is focused on getting your mind right and your money right. And we decided to do this podcast in order to be able to highlight women-owned, Black-owned, BIPOC-owned, and then also other companies and organizations that support those people in that population, because we know that those marginalized communities need all of the interest, all of the engagement, all of the love. We need all of the money, all the attention. We need all of that. Okay. And so one of the things that I like to do is just really shine a light on those people. And so in working with She Podcast and being one of the speakers, there are other amazing speakers that are going to be at this organization's event that's coming up in June. And I said, I would love to interview the women. And so now I get to interview the woman, right? And so I have somebody coming up next who is really awesome, really fantastic. And it is Nicole. And Nicole Walker, she has a company called WinHers United. So I want her to tell us about you and what made you start podcasting in the first place.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here and love the cause, of why we are here, right? So what made me start a podcast is just actually wanting to take myself and entrepreneurship seriously, right? Like I have been down the entrepreneurial road several times. I call it in my past life. Right. I really didn't take things seriously. So I relocated from New Jersey down to Tampa, Florida. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take it seriously. I ended up hiring a business coach, and my business coach said, you should start a podcast. And kind of with some tugging and pulling, right, I actually decided to start a podcast based on a suggestion of my business coach. And that was March 1st of 2018. So we turned 5 years old in March.
Yes, congratulations. So you not only listen, but now we have the longevity to go along with it. And so how has that changed your life? Because, when you said taking things seriously, like with me teaching people how to start and grow their businesses, I'm always of the mind that I used to be. Okay. This kind of person that's like, I'm going to give you this advice, do the things I tell you. And I still am that person. Okay. But at the same time, I don't want to push people so much that they don't want to do the thing, even if I know that they'll be great. So I just I suggest it, and then we see what manifests from that person. And even though I know that I'm right when I suggest it, the person still has to do it, right? So what was it that business coach said that really helped you to say, I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to start the podcast?
Oh, well, it actually wasn't my business coach, right? So you know how they say people plant seeds and other people come along to water those seeds. So it was that kind of situation, right? Well, twofold. So when he said start a podcast, I was just really eager, and I just want to take a step back because you talked about what made me take it seriously. So a missed opportunity or a lesson learned is what made me take, entrepreneurship seriously this time around. Because in the past, I had started a photography company, right? Super serious, going around New Jersey, doing different photography at like events and locations. And one of my big goals was to be a wedding photographer. And I had created these business cards, all of this stuff, right? And someone emailed me about being a photographer for their wedding, but I wasn't connecting all of the dots or just really thinking I was going to get an email. So I never checked my email. And when I finally checked my email months later, I saw that I had the opportunity that in my mind was my big break. And basically it was too late for that opportunity, so a extreme lesson learned was what made me take entrepreneurship seriously this time. Right. Yeah. And what made me listen to my business coach is that I was just eager and I was ready, right? So I was open to suggestion. So when he first said start a podcast, I said, okay, so I did the research. I came up with questions, direction, all kind of stuff like that. And then we had another session and he goes, well, podcasting, I'm going to tell you it's a lot of work. So then when he said that, I said, well, wait a minute. This was your idea. This was not my idea. I wanted the book, right? So hang this up. I'm not doing it. Just so happened there was a podcasting 101 workshop in the area where I live. And I attended that 101 workshop, talked to the host of the workshop. He basically gave me an extra validation of what I needed in relation to the direction I wanted to know. And he just really simplified some of the things. So that gave me that final oomph and push I needed to start my podcast. And literally 2 weeks after I attended that session, I started interviewing. And 4 weeks after my first interview, my podcast launched. So I'm one of those activators, hit the ground running. So once I, got that last oomph, it was on.
And so I love it because you have one of these like magnetic type personalities. And so I'm gonna say this is no offense to everybody that's in the South, but when you're from up top, okay, so which is what they like to call it, right? The North. I think that we just genuinely have a sense of tenacity that is undeniable. And so once you put your mind to it, you're going to do whatever it is in excellence, right? And so even if you had to kick and scream to get there, but once it's like, no, this is it, this is a decision, let's do it. And so I love the fact that you didn't wait too long to actually put it together. But one of the distinctions that you have specifically is a top mom podcast, right? And so I would imagine you never run out of material. Like when you talk about that. So there are a lot of people who are moms who are like, I might want to listen to a podcast, but I'm not thinking about starting one, or maybe they are thinking about starting one. What kind of advice would you give to moms who are like, I think that this might be something? Because like I said, the stories are always going to be there.
Right. So the focus of the podcast is for women of color entrepreneurs, right? So in that, of course, is moms, right? And a lot of times, some of the questions that I received and the questions that I ask the mothers, wives of the podcast is like, how do you balance it all? Right. So really figuring out balance and how to keep things together when you have so many moving pieces of the puzzle in your life. And for me personally, one of the distinctions is because on top of being a mom, I'm actually a single mom, right? So that's a whole nother level. And I just am really intentional about my time, right? And I explain to my children, or well, my daughter's an adult now, right? So she was recently living here. She just moved back out. But, like, this is my time. I need this time. Like, literally, my son's home from school right now because he went to the dentist this morning. I said, I'm about to go on an interview. I need you to keep it down, but like really having those time blocks, so to say, and just being unapologetic. Because I feel like as women and as mothers, sometimes we can feel bad because we want to take time for ourselves and don't see the necessity, in taking time for ourselves, whether that looks like self-care, whether that looks like pursuing a goal or a dream that you have, like make that time, like you make time for everyone else, but without fulfilling yourself, you can end up being resentful and just burnt out, right? So really being intentional, creating those boundaries and setting that time is what I would say.
Now, with your organization, what do you want women to get if they say, listen, I'm interested in WinHers United. I want to explore that a little bit more. What was your kind of goal in creating that as far as from an organizational standpoint and kind of attracting your ideal client that is just totally in love and is an advocate for your brand?
Yeah, so it's so funny because my brand has morphed into just its own thing recently, right? So I'll just go from the beginning, right? In the beginning of creating WinHers United was, number one, to showcase women of color entrepreneurs, right? And that's because women of color entrepreneurs have a double systematic disadvantage, right? Like we already have a disadvantage by being a woman, regardless of what color you are. But then people of color have a disadvantage for being a person of color, right? So now you put both of those together, and you knock us down just a little bit, quote unquote, right? So I wanted to highlight this, to me, underrepresented, underappreciated community, right? I wanted to also show women that we can come together, we can celebrate each other, we can hold hands, like we can be in the same industry doing the same thing and still clap for our fellow sister, because it takes nothing away from us and actually adds to our being, right? Like I have a background in corporate America. And I was so sick and tired of this invisible one seat at the table mentality, that you had to backbite and pull your sister down for your spot, right? So I wanted to show women that we don't have to do that. And I also wanted to spread the message of self-leadership, people leadership, business leadership, like really showing us that we are leaders in our own right? Because first we have to get up, we have to lead ourselves every day, as women, as mothers, right? We are leaders of a household, and a lot of times when people think of a leader, they think of a white man. But yet women and women of color are leading and have been leading for a long time. And I wanted just to change the face of what a leader looks like.
Now, I mean, I love it. I applaud it. And I think that as much as we want to think that, and I know that there is, enough room for everybody, there always seems to be somebody, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but who comes into your atmosphere. I like to call it your atmosphere, right? And they glean from you, they love it and everything. And then they seem to want to go start their own thing, right? So I haven't really had this conversation with anybody on this podcast. So I felt like you were the perfect person to do it today. But I know somebody who this has happened to, one of my friends, and somebody just opened up something recently, but they came, they absorbed, and then all of a sudden it was, okay, well, I'm opening up my own thing. And there's nothing wrong with you opening up your own thing or starting something like that. But it seems like they don't necessarily recognize the help that was there beforehand. So what do you say to people who get very disgruntled because somebody is, quote unquote, copying, imitating, stealing kind of thing? And I would imagine that is something that you probably experienced over the years, and especially dealing with people who don't understand that there is an abundance and there's not a scarcity when it comes to being able to serve.
Right. Yes, I am very familiar with that, right? And for a long time, I had such a problem with it, right? Like, why are they copying me, right? Like, that was something that I would say all the time, and this was in personal life, like before I even went into business. And then I switched my mentality to imitation is the greatest form of flattery, like, which at the present moment, it may not feel great, right? But in essence, it is, right? And I had to also realize, like, I'm an influencer, and when you are an influencer, you influence people into things, right? So those were all things that I had to accept and realize that, like, unless I'm gonna go tie this person up and hide them in the basement, like, what can I really do to stop that thing, right? So it's nothing I can do to control this person. So then what can I do for myself, so that I don't get too bogged down and pay attention to the wrong thing, right? Because if you're putting too much attention into that, that means you're not putting attention onto what you have going on, which is where your attention deserves to be, right? So I think that that's super important to pay attention to that, right? I will also say for people that, may do that, like, give people credit. It doesn't take away from you to give a person credit. Like, that is so important, because, like, nothing is new under the sun, right? Like, we all get influenced in some kind of form or fashion, I will say sometimes I think people do it subconsciously and may not intentionally do it. Now, I have heard of stories where people, like, legit copy word for word somebody else's copy. Like, people, we have to be better than that, right? But I think sometimes people may just be so enthralled in somebody else's thing that, they are imitating this person without, like, directly meaning to imitate that person, right? So I will say also, just giving people grace, and just realizing how great you are, right? Because if you weren't great, wouldn't nobody be copying off of you, Yes. So, like, I just think it's super important, to focus on what's positive, as opposed to what's negative, right? I will say trademarking and copywriting, as far as a business entity,
come on,
is of extreme importance if you want to put some legality around that thing, and again, like, deciding what battles are worth fighting, right? Because let's say someone does do that, are you going to go into litigation? Litigation can be long, litigation can be expensive. but having that trademark may make it not as attractive, to other people, right? So it is ways to combat that. And I would also just say ways to even, decide how much energy you're going to allow something like that to take up in your person.
Mm-hmm. Now, with the transition from going up north to going down south, and starting the podcast, have you found that there has been, some major changes in maybe just the way that you do business now? Because now that you have this platform, where people can literally hear you around the world, it's not just I'm in Tampa or I'm in Jersey, or, it's now, you're being a voice for people that are all over the place, right? All different types of women in color. And so, how has that kind of shifted or changed the way that you do things, the way that you do business, and how you live your life now?
That's a good question. I will say, like I said, I didn't take things seriously in the North as far as business. So I'm not sure personally if the location is what changed, but I will say like there were just different factors within myself. Like entering into this space just allowed me to learn so much about mindset and just how I want to show up as a person. So really taking entrepreneurship seriously, I feel like is what changed the way I showed up, and allowed me to want to do this mindset work, want to do this personal development work, right? And in taking that journey, this is what I say, right? Like, I feel like we can live as many lives as we choose to, meaning you have the power to reinvent yourself every single day, every single moment, right? And that's something that I just took up, and I will say it started with me getting my master's degree. I took a class called leadership. And in taking that class, I had to send out surveys to different people in the workplace, people that knew me personally, and ask them how they interpreted me, so to say, right? And some of the answers I received, like they made me cry, some of the answers, right? Because I feel like we all think that we show up in one shape, form, or fashion, right? But unless you seek that feedback to find out how people are receiving you, you never know, how you're truly showing up, right? So that was, I want to say, the catalyst to me realizing, there's some things I need to change. I will say also, like, I'm just Jersey, regardless of where I am. So I'm a little rough around the edges, like I say that, God was even funny in leading me into podcasting because, like, you see, I couldn't even say the word, whatever legal, how I tried to say
I know what you mean, but I was with you and I knew what you were going for. Yep.
Right. All the words. And I'm like, why do you want me speaking to people? And I can't even enunciate everything the right way it's supposed to be said. Right. But people love the way I talk for whatever reason. Right. So I will say at the core, like I am who I am. And that's something that I had to love, accept, and embrace. Regardless of my location, I also had to look myself in the mirror and accept the things about myself that I didn't like and make a conscious decision on how I wanted to show up in the future, and I believe that, WinHers United, this journey is what started that, not necessarily the location.
Now I want to go back to this survey. I just want to know this. Was it anonymous or did you know who was answering these responses?
Did I? Wait, so that's a good question.
Interesting. If it's anonymous, you don't know who's saying what, but if you know who's saying it, then it's like, this is how you really feel. So I just wanted to know that. Was it anonymous?
Right. So I feel like it was anonymous, but no, it wasn't, because I remember, I don't know if I knew the exact person, but I remember that the people that gave me the lower grade, so it wasn't, were my friends and family members. The workplace people thought I was amazing because that's usually how we treat people, right? Like the people outside of our orbit, we treat them so good. But then the people closer to us, we may forget to be, Miss Nice Nice that we are at the office, and that's where some of the lesser scores, and don't get me wrong, they weren't horrible, but they just weren't what I would want them to be, right?
They might be more honest too.
Touche.
I mean, like, honestly, because the people at work didn't want you coming in there shooting up anything. So, your friends and family were probably like, I'm going to tell her how she really makes me feel, right? And the people at work were like, she's okay. Look at her. But no, I just wonder, because I think that, what you said about it to me that was really important and that resonated with me was, you don't always get feedback from the people that are around you. And sometimes, they don't tell you everything that you need to unless you ask them. And so by taking that initiative to ask gave you, to me, a little bit more freedom to make a decision on who you want it to be, right? And like, who you were, who you are, and that's never going to change at the core. But for business and for showing up a certain way, I think that you were able to get some good information that we don't even often ask for, and maybe we should ask for more feedback and how people feel about what we do, how our business is, because like when we do events, we ask for feedback in a survey, right? But you're not necessarily asking for that in your daily life. Like, what could I do better? How could I be a better mom? And I think that can be an important factor into making your business more successful. So I'm glad you said that. And hopefully somebody will, listen to that little piece and then consider, evaluating themselves. So if you were looking and you said, okay, going forward, where do you see your podcast going? Like, what would you like to see from it if it's like 5 years from now? Like, is there something that you haven't accomplished yet or some specific goal that you'd like to get to?
Oh, that's a good question, right? Because I am at and this is breaking news, right?
Ooh, I love groundbreaking news. Yes. Give it to me.
I am at a pivotal point in my podcasting journey, right? Like, I am deciding what I want to do with my podcast. So I'm thinking about taking a pause. And in that pause, I don't know if it'll be, finite or indefinite, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where I am in relation to podcasting for WinHers United, right? Mm-hmm. Does that mean that I'll never come back as a podcaster again? I don't know. I doubt it. Does that mean that I won't interview women of color again? I doubt it, right? Like, I don't know exactly what it means. So I'm in like this weird place, right? Mm-hmm. But I'll say what I want to see with the content that I currently have available, because I've interviewed over 160 women of color entrepreneurs, thousands of hours of content, to be consumed is, like I think most listeners or most podcasters want more listenership, like, listen, this is some good content, right? Like, the basis of WinHers United is 4 pillars. It's business, it's mindset, it's personal development, and it's self-care, right? Like, it's the things that we need, to be successful business women, to be successful women in general, mothers, even career women, like it's just such good information. And I want to see, more listenership and more people taking advantage of what is freely available for them to take advantage of, right? Another thing that I have been thinking about, I attended PodFest in January, and I attended a session that talked about turning your interview series into a narrative series, right? So I'm like, maybe I could pull pieces of these interviews and turn that into a narrative, right? I was like, oh, this is nice, right? I've also been thinking about having a Where Are They Now series, because like I was intentional about wanting to interview new women every single episode, right? Like, because there's so many women of color entrepreneurs. And I was intentional about that. So now it's like, like I've foster relationships with these women, and I see their journeys, right? And a lot of their journeys of people that I interviewed back in 2018 looks very different in 2023, right? Yeah. So I can, go back and interview some of the women that I've interviewed in the past. What else? I've thought about taking like some of the content and kind of packaging it whereby it's like, oh, this is about marketing, and this is about, creating a launch. This is about financial, like all of the different topics, so many different topics that are talked about. I've thought about that, right? So many different things that I have thought about doing. And I think you touched on this earlier, that I actually forgot to talk about just the evolution of what podcasting has done for me, right? So like since becoming a podcaster, and this is one of the reasons why I'm thinking about putting a pause, because being a single mom, I'm still in corporate, I'm also running a business. It's just a lot of stuff going on, and in choosing balance, which is what we talked about, it's like I got to figure out a better balance because it's starting to get heavy, right? So as a result of starting a podcast, I've also become a public speaker. I started coaching people on becoming podcasters. I help people with podcast growth, right? So I consider myself a podcast strategist, as well as most recently a sponsorship strategist. So I've also started helping podcasters get sponsorships, as well as podcast organizations get sponsorships, right? So podcasting has just pushed me into a whole different realm, right? That I didn't even know I was capable of going into. So, like the future of my podcast itself, I don't know, but the future of my life as a result of podcasting, just endless is what I'll say.
I like that. Now, what do you think about the future of podcasting as an industry?
I think podcasting is in its infancy, and it's only going to get bigger and better, right? And I think like podcasting, I've seen the popularity of podcasts just grow, right? When I came in 2018, it was nowhere near as big as it is now, right? And some people, oh, everybody has a podcast. Yeah, you might think so, but if you think of the number of people that listen to podcasts versus the number of people that listen to radio versus the number of people that watch TV, it's still a huge gap in between that can be filled. Right. So podcasting is still in baby stages. The adaptation rate doesn't even equate, to radio, to TV. Right. So it's so much room for podcasting to grow. And I think that as it continues to grow, it'll just will receive better and better content, right? Because people will be focusing more on sound quality, because you have to figure out ways to make yourself stand out in the crowd, because it will get crowded or more crowded, right? So we'll just see it get better and better, right? And bigger and bigger. And I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, I am too. And that's why I think that something like She Podcast is so important, because of the fact that women, just, everything else, we're still marginalized within this community. And the thing is that it's not that you don't have the opportunity to jump into it. You can start very low cost. You can kind of start for free almost, and then you can go up and you can develop. And I think that to me, podcast gives you room and gives you a little bit of grace to start to really develop your voice, because your episode 1 is not going to be what your episode 100 is, and most people don't make it to 100. So if you can get to 100 or past that, it's like you have noticed that you've improved in some way, whether it was sound, whether it was visual, whether it was in your interview skills, whether it was in the podcasting or something, you've, grown in some way, shape or form while you were doing it. So I think it's one of those platforms that it gives you nobody expects you to be perfect. And I think that's what's really a key thing to podcasting. It's like, it could be better, but you know what? That's pretty good. And I think we're willing to, give you a thumbs up quicker with podcasting than almost anything else. So, if a person said, Nicole, why should I come to your session? What are you going to be giving me out here at She Podcast? Give us a reason why people should come to your session.
Yeah. So my session is called Leveraging Your Podcast Data. And it's something that I talk about that is in relation to obtaining sponsorships, right? And a lot of people want to figure out ways to monetize their podcast, right? So if you are interested in learning about the types of data that is available to you as a podcaster, then this is a session that you want to attend. If you want to learn about the ways to manipulate the data that is available on your podcast to paint an amazing picture of how much of an amazing podcaster you are, then this is a session that you want to attend, right? If you want to learn about some of the podcast data points to include in a media kit that you'll then send to a sponsor, this is a session that you want to attend, right? So we geek out on data. It don't get too technical, right? And it just tells you some of that information and the different ways to use that information, right? To market yourself, market your podcast, and also make better decisions as a podcaster, because your podcast data can help you determine, what kind of content your listeners actually want to hear, where you should go to target sponsors, so many different things that you can get from your data. So we'll get right in. So if you into data, or you want to be into data, because you should know your numbers, then this is a session that you don't want to miss.
Yes, I can tell you, my husband, Mr. Brown, he's already that he's going to be like, what? The data, the sponsorship? Let's go to that one. Because he's all into the numbers. And so those metrics, he's here for that. So I'm sure one of us or both of us will be popping into the session. So I'm really actually very interested to see what this schedule is going to be, because I'm so hoping that some of my favorites are not at the same time. And then it gives you that flexibility, because it's 100 speakers, right? And so we're talking about a couple of days. So this is not a one-day thing. So for anybody that's thinking about coming out, that's part of the reason why we do these interviews, because now you can see who's going to be there. And I think a lot of times when we go to conferences, you're getting out like this thing and you're trying to read and decipher like, oh, which one am I going to go to? But once you get to hear people, this kind of gives you the perspective of them talking about their podcast, but also why they feel like you should come. And you can say, all right, I like her. Yep, I'm going, So that's the reason why we decided that we're going to do this. And I'm very excited. I'm so glad that you were able to participate. I can't wait to see you in June. For anybody that's watching on the replay, you can still leave comments and things like that. And then you can go, if you missed it, you can always watch it on the replay. But feel free to keep sharing this content, because I think that it's very important for us to know all of the other podcasters that are out there, and definitely women, and definitely BIPOC, people of color, all of that, because, even within podcasting, we're still a smaller group, and so we can just amplify each other's voices. We can make sure that everybody knows about everybody and keep on growing this community. So Nicole, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate you, and I will see you in June. Yay. Yes. So everybody else, make sure that you always show up and show out. Continue to give it to the people. Have a great day, everybody.